Good afternoon and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland and this week's Full Scottish. My name is Huw Marshall and I'm pleased to say on the programme this week we're joined by retired MSP and SNP President Maureen Watt. Welcome, Maureen.
Hi Huw, good morning.
And also we are delighted to welcome Fiona Grahame, the editor of Your News. Good afternoon, Fiona.
Afternoon.
To start with, we will begin with the Middle East update. At least 68,858 Palestinians have been killed and 170,664 wounded in Gaza since 7th of October 2023. When is a ceasefire not a ceasefire? Since the ceasefire agreement came into effect on October 11th, a total of 226 Palestinians have been killed and 594 wounded as the Israeli army continues shelling and demolishing Palestinian homes in Gaza City and Khan Yunis. So I don't know what your feelings are around the situation there, because obviously once the ceasefire was announced, everything seemed to go quiet on as far as sort of reporting. Maureen?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, when is a ceasefire not a ceasefire? The fact that people are continuing to be killed by the Israeli Defense Force it cannot be called a ceasefire, and yet no one is calling out the Israelis yet, and I wonder how long they'll be allowed to carry on with this before Trump actually says that you're not abiding by the ceasefire. I won't hold my breath on it. But Israel doesn't seem to have grasped the concept of a ceasefire. I mean, I understand there were raids into Lebanon in the last couple of days, and it's all very well having a ceasefire, if there is indeed a ceasefire, but nobody's talking about how Gaza is going to recover from this. And as you said, Huw, Israel is still demolishing buildings. So I actually just have no idea what the future is. I haven't heard of any ongoing talks in the Middle East about how Gaza recovers from this and what the way forward is.
Fiona, it was reported, I think there's 20 living hostages who were returned when the ceasefire was announced, and there were 20 dead hostages, and I think 18 of those have been returned. They did return another 2, but again, it was shown that they weren't actually the people that they thought they were. Do you think that is a stumbling block in why Israel are, not cooperating with the ceasefire?
Well, let's remember that Israel controls 53% of Gaza. So they've got that under total military control. And some of those bodies, sadly, will be lying underneath the rubble in that area. So to retrieve those bodies is extremely difficult. Now, Israel is also holding thousands of Palestinians who they have illegally taken to these dreadful, let's call them what they are, concentration camps within Israel. And having returned some of them, we do know that these people have been tortured and treated brutally. And let's also not forget, this is a genocide. So the Gaza genocide, in a way, is continuing, even though there's this supposed ceasefire, because limited humanitarian aid is being permitted in by Israel, and people are still requiring huge amounts of medical aid because all that side of Gaza infrastructure was decimated. So Israel might use the fact that there's still bodies lying with Hamas, if you like, of these terrible the hostages that were taken during that terrible incident on October the 7th. But that's we all know what their ultimate aim is to take over that whole area and to cleanse it, as they see, of Palestinians.
Maureen, Fiona makes some interesting points there. When you see things like the fact that infrastructure, all the hospitals have been destroyed, the fact that the Western organisations and also some of the Arab country organisations aren't being given access to Gaza to help with that rebuilding, because even though the shelling and the drone attacks may have reduced substantially, but those people are still living in situations that are terrible. And as you were saying just now, thousands of Palestinians, their families in concentration camps. How on earth are we expected to find peace when you've got one side treating the other so badly?
I think you've hit the nail on the head, Huw. And what I was going to say is that until outside agencies are allowed into Gaza, then we are really not going to get any progress. I mean, the fact that the hundreds of aid trucks that are on the borders waiting to get in are not being allowed in doesn't sound to me like a ceasefire. The fact that the media are still not allowed into Gaza doesn't sound to me like a ceasefire. So I cannot understand why the media and outside organisations are not allowed into Gaza, even if it was to say, well, we'll help find the bodies underneath the rubble. I mean, if Israel really wanted the bodies, and I have to say that throughout this war, I haven't thought that it's been their top priority, then they would be saying, let us work with you, Hamas, to find the bodies if that was the really top number one priority. But we know it's not, as Fiona said, the further destruction of Gaza till it's completely erased to the ground.
It's clear that for any future for Gaza and the Palestinians, Hamas can't have a part in that. Obviously, what they did on October the 7th was beyond horrific, but also just incredibly counterproductive. When you think about Tony Blair being mentioned as somebody in charge of looking after the sort of rebuilding of Palestine, does that fill you with hope or worry, Fiona?
Well,
no,
absolute
that
horror.
war criminal, the war criminal Tony Blair, no thank you, we don't want him there. And Palestinians do not want him there. And, we can sit here and pontificate, but, the land belongs to the Palestinians, and it's up to them to decide who leads them, not us sitting here in the UK, a country that's complicit in the genocide because, we've been arming Israel.
Maureen, sorry, do you want to come in there? What's your thoughts on Tony Blair being involved?
Well, I mean, I hadn't heard her on the TV, on the media for ages, Hannah Ashwari, who has been a long-term Palestinian spokesman, being excoriating about Tony Blair and definitely not somebody that should be anywhere near there. But absolutely, Hamas cannot be in charge of anything in Gaza going forward. But we see rival clans now out in the streets trying to take control. And this is, I mean, we never learn lessons, do we? That you have to have, as soon as you have a ceasefire, a plan that is ready to go to restore order, law and order, and begin to restore democracy. And as far as I can see, nothing of that seems to be a top priority for anybody.
Thank you for that. We'll move on now to the Ukraine update, day 1348. Ukraine's top military commander said its troops were still holding out in the embattled eastern city of Pokrovsk, which Moscow said its forces were at last enclosing in a pincer movement after more than a year of fighting. We are holding Pokrovsk, Ukraine's army chief Alexander Sursky said on Facebook on Saturday. A comprehensive operation to destroy and dislodge enemy forces from Pokrovsk is ongoing. Ukraine's military said that it has improved its positions in some districts. Kyiv is raising the number of its assault troops in the area. The 7th Rapid Response Corps said on Facebook, adding that the situation remained difficult and dynamic. Capturing Pokrovsk, dubbed the gateway to Donetsk, would be the most important Russian territorial gain inside Ukraine since Moscow took the ruined city of Avdiivka in early 2024. The Russian Defense Ministry claimed to have thwarted an attempt by Ukrainian special forces to fly soldiers by helicopter into Pokrovsk. Ukrainian military sources are reported to have said on Saturday that Kyiv had landed special forces to fight in parts of Pokrovsk, as Moscow said its troops had surrounded Ukrainian contingents. Data shows Russia fired more missiles at Ukraine in overnight attacks during October than in any month since at least the start of 2023. Russia's army fired 270 missiles over October, up 46% on the previous month, according to an AFP analysis of daily data published by Ukraine's Air Force. The strikes, which have targeted Ukraine's fragile energy grid for the fourth winter running, have cut power to hundreds and thousands of people. It is part of what Ukraine says is a deliberate and cynical Russian strategy to wear down Ukraine's civilian population. A Russian strike set ablaze a shop in Ukraine's southeastern Dnipropetrovsk region on Saturday, killing 2 people and injuring several others. The region's acting governor, Vladislav Hayvenko, said public broadcaster Suspline said 7 people were injured. Pictures posted online showed a large blaze amid piles of rubble. Ukraine's emergency services said 1 person had been killed in an attack on the town of Maharanets, further south in Dnipropetrovsk region. A Ukrainian drone attack damaged and set ablaze a tanker and infrastructure at a major oil terminal in Russia's key Black Sea port of Tuapse overnight, authorities in the southern region of Krasnodar said on Sunday. The port is home to the Tuapse Black Sea oil terminal and a Rosneft-controlled oil refinery, which Ukraine has targeted with several drone strikes this year. Russian energy company Gazprom's average daily natural gas supplies to Europe via the Turk Stream undersea pipeline is reported to have risen by 5% in October from the previous months. Turkey is the only transit route left for Russian gas to Europe after Ukraine chose not to extend a 5-year transit deal with Moscow when it expired on the 1st of January. Germany's defense minister is reported to be confident its fractious ruling coalition can agree on a new model of military service in time for it to come into effect next year as planned. Given security concerns over Russia, the cabinet has already agreed to Minister Boris Pistorius' proposal for a new voluntary military service to help boost the number of recruits and reservists. The plan still requires approval by the German parliament. It's incredible that, the statistics there that, the attacks have increased hugely in October since Trump met Putin in Alaska and was talking about having, he's had a great conversation on the phone and he's going to meet up in Hungary, I think it was, isn't it, to discuss things. It's clear now that Putin is just playing Trump like a fiddle. What do you see as the future of this, Maureen?
Well, I think the future has got to be the EU because, as you say, Putin has, 1, no intention of stopping the war, and 2, just playing Trump along. And, if Trump doesn't get another peace deal to notch up, then I think he's going to lose interest, which is why the EU, or the coalition of the willing, must step up really quickly. I mean, saying that they think they have to wait to the new year for the offensive means that the poor Ukrainians are going to have to go endure another winter. And as you say, Putin is deliberately attacking power supplies. I mean, the way that the war is conducted now is really changing, with drones having a much greater place in the war. I mean, I was watching a program where supplies to the front line are delivered by drones, and drones are hunting out Russians and actually taking Russian captives. So yeah, it just looks as if it's going to be another few months. I mean, I think things are happening by the coalition of the willing. I think things are gearing up with the militaries of the countries involved, but it does just seem a hell of a slow process.
Fiona, just quickly, do you think that, obviously what's happening in the United States now, because I was reading this morning that ICE agents are now removing Russian dissidents who were in Russian prisons and ended up in US prisons. And it appears some sort of deal has been done between Moscow and Trump to send those people back. With the coalition of the willing, is it showing that we just need to basically try and forget about the USA and look after things ourselves?
Well, the UK look after things ourselves. I mean, we're totally isolated because we removed ourselves from Europe, and it's an extremely worrying time because we have Mad King Trump in the White House who rolls out a red carpet to Putin, and is conducting a war against his own people, sending troops into American cities. So this is an extremely anxious time for the whole world. And my heart's out to the Ukrainian refugees that live in Scotland, that have been welcomed here. And I think all that we could really do in Scotland is assure them of our continued support and help. And, we send humanitarian trucks to Ukraine. Yeah. That's all we can really do because, we're not an independent nation. We're just an adjunct of the rest of the UK. So, but it's extremely worrying time because Putin can basically do whatever he likes.
Yeah. So moving on to the next topic, if you haven't heard about what's been going on in the House of Windsor this week, you must be living under a rock. Those of us with longer memories will remember the UK tabloid headlines extolling the exploits of Randy Andy. Some might find it strange that it's taken so long to strip him of his titles in the face of the now posthumous accusations from Virginia Giuffre. So it's now time to answer for these allegations in court. Maureen, I see the United States have asked to question him. Do you see any possibility of him facing not just justice, but actually helping the inquiry?
Well, he's certainly not going to do it willingly. But I can't understand why he's not being charged in this country for rape of Virginia Giuffre. I mean, if there's evidence to that effect, then surely if he's ever going to be taken to justice, then it should be now. I mean, I think, notwithstanding the fact that the media just love this story and are going to make it run and run forever and a day if they can. I mean, we'll be seeing the trucks coming out of, the lorries coming out of Royal Lodge and going up to Sandringham and all that kind of stuff. I mean, the man deserves everything that he gets now. I didn't meet him once. I was at a dinner that he was speaking at in Aberdeen, and he is so utterly pompous, unbelievable. But I think the Americans and the US Democrats and the lawmakers there will continue to a point where the king might have to say, you have to go and face up to things. And given what the king has done this week, that might well be a possibility. But honestly, I mean, I just wish we could shut the whole thing down and let the legal people get on with it, because it's just so awful.
Fiona, obviously, it's something that, a lot of people have been talking about. People trying to get used to calling him Andrew Mountbatten Windsor now that he's lost his title. But do you worry that, we're forgetting about the victims here? There's all the talk is about the people. I think it's quite interesting as well that the Epstein story ranks high amongst every political sort of colour in the US. Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, they all, 80% think we need to get that information out. Now that Prince Andrew, is basically, the king has basically outed him to a certain extent. What does that mean for people like Trump, who obviously don't want to see those files brought out? Because we know we're waiting for a Democrat senator to be signed in order for her to be able to become the signature that's needed to start. It doesn't mean that the files will be released, but at least it starts the process. What's your feeling about that?
Well, look at that disgusting display of wealth and crassness that Trump had the other day at his Halloween party, where semi-naked young girls or women were dancing about in amongst the elite, what a name for them, the rich and powerful men in suits, and so these people, they fear nothing, and Trump is protecting them by not releasing these Epstein files. And I've listened to some of the testaments made by some of these victims, the young girls that were raped and sexually abused on Epstein's plane and on his private island, and it's harrowing. And these must be our focus. That these so they're so brave coming forward and speaking about what happened to them, because the people that did this to them, they're all still there. They're all still very, very powerful people, and Trump is in amongst it all. And why he won't release the Epstein files if he's nothing to fear from them, well, what is the question there? Why won't he release them? And it's something his MAGA base went on and on about, a prime motive for them to get him elected. So he's betraying them as well. So yeah, let's have these Epstein files released and identify these criminals that raped all these young girls.
Yeah, it's an incredibly sad and powerful story. So on to our next story. ScotGov Climate Action Secretary Gillian Martin will continue to push for more ambitious climate action when she attends COP30 in Brazil. Ms Martin's schedule will include engagements with representatives from regions 4 and under 2 coalition, highlighting Scotland's leadership on climate change. What's your feeling? Because it's interesting from a Welsh perspective. The Labour government and Plaid Cymru have been sort of quite progressive when it comes to climate targets, even though it's something that seems to be unpopular with a certain section of society. What's people's views of the SNP's policies when it comes to the environment? Fiona?
Well, I'm not in the SNP, I'll say that right away. So I feel free to criticise them. And I think they're in a bit of a quandary here, because whilst they want to promote, the message that they're environmentally friendly, and yet they're still encouraging oil exploration. They're still got that part of them that it's Scotland's oil, and we need to have that there, and continue to drill for oil. So I'm a wee bit, and I just don't understand where the SNP are totally coming from. I understand that they've got that big, Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire, and they've got to think about the workers there. But the climate is in catastrophe mode, and we saw that with that recent hurricane that hit Jamaica. Tremendous winds there. We're going to have more and more of these events, as we know. So I don't know what the SNP policy is now, really, how they can marry up the two things, investing in oil and in renewables. Be interesting to hear from Maureen on that.
Yeah, Maureen, as former president of the SNP, you're probably closer to the information than the two of us. How are you seeing the way that the SNP are playing this?
Well, golly, I could probably wax lyrical for the rest of the programme on this, but it is a hugely difficult situation. And I'm currently president of the SNP, but obviously not close to government and parliament, just the party. Now, first of all, we were told that the North Sea was a mature basin, and we want to move towards renewables. But yet, we all know that we're going to need gas, particularly, and some oil going forward, because so many houses are heated by gas. And the programme of changing that to solar or heat pumps is a long, slow, very expensive process. And what I think the nub of it is what does just transition mean? Does it mean that you gradually or quickly try and get all the people who work in oil and gas into jobs in renewables? And that is hugely difficult, especially when you have governments, especially in the United States, who don't recognize climate change and want drill, baby, drill all over the world. And oil companies are quite happy to listen to that and stop or reduce their commitment to investing in renewables. So I think we're in a really difficult situation. The UK government is in control of energy policy, and it is particularly the uncertainty, and the petroleum levy is particularly hitting Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire. And you would expect our politicians of all parties in this part of the world to be pointing that out. Now, as somebody who worked in the oil and gas industry, it certainly had its peaks and troughs before. And the oil industry gets away with shedding labour very easily because it does it under the radar, and big payoffs, and unions and people don't talk about it in relation to, for example, Alexander Dennis or something like that. But the same number of people might be being paid off by different companies. I mean, what I think is important for Aberdeen is that both governments secure its position as an all-energy capital of Europe. And we still see major companies working out of Aberdeen all over the world. So it is a really difficult situation, and I don't think anybody has got an answer of just exactly what should happen.
Yeah, it's one of those, because it's an interesting one in Wales where Plaid Cymru is opposed to nuclear power, but yet they support nuclear power on Ynys Môn, where the First Minister is the Senedd member for. So it is that fudging around where you've got to put jobs against your principles, and it is something, unfortunately, politicians do. But what was interesting, I found, just thinking about the sort of the environmental challenges, Scotland's wind farms generated nearly 28 terawatt hours of electricity, which represents 30% of all wind generation in the UK. Wales was quite a bit lower, 7.8 terawatts, which is about 10%. But when you think that 84% of the UK population are English, Scots, I think 8%, Wales, something like 4%. It's extractive as well, isn't it? It's hard to be doing something where you're trying to combat climate, but yet you've got huge, very high bills. In Scotland, it's higher because of the networks and the cost. And I imagine in somewhere like Orkney, the logistics of getting power is very challenging. But when you're seeing this power being extracted from Scotland and the bills staying high across Scotland, it's hard for the public to take. Fiona.
Well, for many years now, Orkney has produced more than its energy needs in renewables. It's mainly wind. And we're getting this third subsea connector because all our energy, by the way, is transported south, and then we have to buy it back at an expensive rate. Like all of the Northern Isles, like Shetland, Orkney, the Western Isles, all the north of Scotland, we're seeing a vast increase in wind farms, and all of that energy is going into transporting down south because that's the national grid, and we all have to buy it back. So all these areas like Orkney, Shetland, Western Isles, north of Scotland, Caithness, where we pay the high rates for heating our home, putting the lights on, and we all have high rates of fuel poverty. We're putting up with all of that energy being exported south. Now, we've got a whole load of new wind farms going up in Orkney and also offshore, because they're vast, much bigger than the ones that are on land, vast wind farms being put in Scotland's waters offshore. And all of that energy produced goes into the national grid, transported south, where people in London can get cheaper electricity, and then we all have to buy it back. And we've got dreadful rates of fuel poverty in Orkney. So, it's not a problem about having connections, energy connections that we don't, that's not our problem. Our problem is that we have no control over locally produced energy. It's all sent south and we buy it back. It's a completely crazy system.
Maureen, what's the situation as far as energy as a devolved competence? Because in Wales, energy is devolved, but only at a very low level, up to a certain number of kilowatt hours. So what controls has the Scottish Government have over energy?
Well, I didn't think we had any control over energy. I mean, I don't think we've got anything like that about kilowatt hours. And as Fiona said, this situation is going to continue until we get independence. Scotland has like a second bonanza of being renewable energy rich. And it is, as she says, absolutely disgraceful that we're producing all this energy again and having to put up with, as many people are objecting to, huge distribution pylons, huge transmission pylons to take it south of the border. And they still, as Fiona said, benefit from cheaper energy. It's just absolutely mad. And I cannot understand a Labour government not changing the rules in relation to energy pricing, and that we are still paying prices that were, you know, that were set, and regimes that were set before we even discovered oil. It's absolutely nuts. And why is no government in Westminster, if they really believe that we're all equal in the devolved nations, doing something about it? And it's just the greed of Westminster that is continuing this. And I think that this is really one issue where it should be front and centre of the elections in May, because this has got to stop. If people in Scotland really are concerned about their energy bills and feel poverty, which they are, here's the only solution that anybody has brought forward, and it has to be independence and control of our own resources.
Just to say, what one big difference between Scotland and Wales is obviously with wind farms that are at sea. Obviously, the sea and the seabed is owned by the King and the Crown Estate. The Crown Estate is devolved to Scotland, so Scottish Government do get those revenues from there. In Wales, it isn't. The Welsh Government, the Welsh Labour Government, have asked for it to be devolved. Every local authority in Wales, all 22, have asked for it to be devolved. Many of those are Labour, and Labour in Westminster have said, no, it's not a priority. So, it's, that the government in Westminster, they're just, you can see why they're becoming so unpopular.
And they wonder why Plaid Cymru win a by-election. Obviously you've managed to get the message across in Wales, and now you're beginning to see them panic a bit, but they don't seem capable. I don't know why. They don't seem capable of doing things like we've been discussing here, and devolving it. It's this central control that has blighted the UK since post-war, really.
Yeah, I agree. Anyway, we have to move on. The Scotch whisky industry was at the heart of the agenda as First Minister John Swinney met US Ambassador Warren A. Stevens at Bute House. The meeting seemed to anger the UK Gov Scotland Secretary Douglas Alexander, rather than being seen as a welcome intervention to help getting tariffs on Scotch whisky removed. I wasn't aware until sort of researching it how big the industry is, not just in Scotland, but just part of the UK economy. I think it's like 7 or 8 billion. How much of those businesses are actually based in Scotland? How much of that money stays in Scotland? How much of it sort of, again, flows south down a whiskey-filled pipe?
Well,
Maureen,
can I come in on this? Yeah, so yeah. I was born and bred in Bamshire, which close to Speyside, which is the heart of the whiskey industry. And I was brought up, told that the warehouses round about Keith in Bamshire held whiskey to the value of more of the gold than the gold in the Bank of England. And that was before Brown sold it off. So it is very close to my heart. A lot of the companies were Scottish owned and Scottish based, but a big company called Diageo has bought over a huge number of distilleries and farms, so that it's now the big player, and it kind of dictates what happens in the industry, not always to the benefit of people working in the industry. But it's really funny to watch how angry Douglas Alexander is getting on this. I mean, John Swinney is quite right. If he's in the United States or meeting Trump up in Balmedy, to bring up whiskey tariffs, which are damaging the industry, and showing to Trump how it's also damaging the bourbon cask making in the United States. So I think John Swinney's playing a blinder, and the fact that he hasn't risen to Douglas Alexander's bait at all, and Douglas Alexander is trying to accuse him of not working with them and all this sort of thing. John is showing the real statesman that he is on this issue. But I hope it's resolved soon.
Yeah. Fiona, obviously, it's the whiskey business. It's not just on the mainland. There's several distilleries on the islands. How big a part of the island economy is whiskey?
Well, we have two very famous whisky distilleries in Orkney, Highland Park and Scapa Distillery. And, there's a huge amount of business to be made in whisky tourism. I mean, and people come from all over the world to visit Scotland just to tour all these distilleries, particularly the ones that are smaller and further afield. And as you quite rightly pointed out, billions of tax goes from whisky goes into the UK Treasury, and we don't get the benefit of that back in Scotland. No way, not the billions. And I'd just like to say that I'd like to see Swinny doing more of these sort of like stepping on the toes of the UK government. I'd like to see him do more of that and get involved more proactively in issues that England or the UK seem to think are their reserve, because they're not. We're a nation here, and I'd like to see our First Minister acting more like that and more proactively on all issues, not just on whisky, but our fishing industry, where we only got like 8% out of that Coastal Communities Fund from the UK. That's an absolute disgrace. When like Shetland bringing nearly all the fishing that there is. I mean, absolutely appalling. So I'd like to see John Swinney doing more of that reaction and getting involved like a statesman, like the leader of a nation.
Do you agree, Maureen? Because it's like I say, living in Wales, it is one of those stories that is cut through from a media perspective here. So it does show that when things like this happen, it is being heard beyond Scotland. How important is it that Swinney develops these international connections?
Well, I think it is important. I think his visit recently to Zambia and Malawi, which was also criticised by the opposition parties, was also very important to show that Scotland punches above its weight in terms of, climate action, for example, and reparations, and working from NGO to NGO in those countries. So that it doesn't fall foul of the corruption of some governments. So I think this certainly in the past few months has really showed that Scotland can play a role on the international stage, and more of that is welcome, because it does. It shows the population that Scotland can perform well on the international stage. And it gives people confidence, I think, because that's what Scots lack, because they're not voting for independence in large enough numbers. I think it's that confidence that people lack. And the more that a First Minister can show that he can hold his own and punch above Scotland's weight on the international stage is really important.
Yeah. Moving on to the final story, which brings us together, Scotland and Wales. This week, John Swinney met Rhun ap Iorwerth, the leader of Plaid Cymru, at Bute House to discuss strengthening the relationship between Scotland and Wales. The SNP and Plaid leaders said an SNP win in Scotland and a Plaid Cymru win in Wales could not be ignored by UK government. I think it's worth thinking about that. There's quite a fair chance that come next May there'll be nationalist governments in Scotland, Wales, and potentially Northern Ireland. Is this something, do these links between these countries, how important do you think it is, Fiona?
I think it's really important, and I'll state now, I had a Welsh granny. So my mother's mother was Welsh. So that blood's in me. And it's the same with it's a Celtic connection as well, if you like. And I think it's really important that we meet with ministers in Wales, and the three island authorities did that. They came together and produced the islands plan, and that was very good because obviously islands share similar issues, and it's the same with Scotland and Wales, and they share a lot of issues together. Housing, I would think, is a major one as well for Welsh people, as it is in Scotland. So, yeah, I think coming together on these things and working together on constitutional matters, and just forging those alliances, I think that would be quite concerning for a UK government to see these alliances taking place.
Maureen, as president of the SNP, you're clearly aware of the relationship between Plaid Cymru and SNP. Goes back many years. Every conference, there's somebody from both parties speaking at each other's conferences. How are you seeing this now moving forward? What impact is this going to have on Starmer and Westminster if you've got two nationalist governments in Scotland and Wales?
Well, as you said, the relationship goes back a long way. I remember meeting Gwyneth Evans quite frequently because my father was in Parliament at the same time as Gwyneth, so and the two Davids. So yes, the relationships go back, and the fraternal greetings that have happened in recent months and happen annually at our respective conferences is always a highlight of the conference. So I think these are really important. And as you pointed out, Huw, in the after the elections in May, we could have three nationalist leaders in government in these devolved areas. And I think that is hugely, hugely significant, because if there's going to be a referendum in one of the devolved nations, then it should be in all of the devolved nations. So it's absolutely vital that we establish these links and keep the telephone lines or emails open right up to the run-up to the election, to share experiences, to share positives and negatives, and work together to make sure that all three nations can achieve their independence.
Obviously, the union is supposedly a union of equals, but that doesn't seem to be the way when you're looking at it from a Scottish, Northern Irish or Welsh perspective. I think it's interesting, as you say, having that block of three governments who can then go to Westminster and take up the cause of devolved governments is really important. I think one thing that's happened in Wales, and this is one of the things that have impacted Labour and led to their collapse in Caerphilly, is they promised change after the general election, that there was going to be two Labour governments at each end of the M4 working together, and what's happened is nothing has changed. If anything, the Labour Senate members have been saying we want this, that and the other, and they're just not being listened to. What was fascinating, the morning after Lindsay Whittle's victory in Caerphilly, Eluned Morgan, the First Minister, was on the phone to Keir Starmer and says, we need help here. So basically, the people at Caerphilly, by electing a Plaid Cymru MP, has guaranteed that Wales will get more money at the budget this month. So it shows what you actually vote for, because I do think, looking at Scotland has more devolved powers. It does get more things like the Crown Estate because of the SNP, because they are not scared, but they know that they can't bluff the other governments. Fiona, how do you see that moving forward? Do you think this is going to be a threat to Starmer? Because obviously there's going to be the council elections as well. But, this next May could be a huge blow to him.
Yeah, I mean, his focus will all be on Englandshire and reform. I mean, that's his, and by going further down the right than he already is, and demonising migrants and refugees and cutting benefits, and that's the way he thinks he can win elections. But, this is a wider thing than folk just voting for Plaid or nationalist parties in Scotland. It's about a general movement in the people, in the civilian population, about taking back control to where they live, to their own nations, to Wales and to Scotland, and for a united Ireland. So it's about more than just voting for a political party. It's a movement. It's basically the last remnants of an empire, the English Empire, breaking up, eventually going. And that's what we're seeing. And hopefully sooner rather than later.
I was in Caerphilly in the run-up and the day of the election, and it was interesting, talking to Plaid Cymru insiders. There was an element of hope, but I think in people's stomachs there was a fear that Reform were going to win because the polling had shown that. Plaid's internal polling shown that they did have a substantial lead, but it was just so big it didn't make sense. Obviously, the results proved to be the other way. I don't know if you heard Byline Scotland had a podcast this week, and they interviewed Sir John Curtis at Strathclyde University, the eminent pollster. And he actually made some interesting comments about Caerphilly, because obviously it was framed from a UK perspective as, Reform, that, people voted tactically to keep them out. And he was saying that potentially there isn't that much evidence to show that. People are genuinely now moving from Labour to Plaid Cymru because they see them as a progressive party. Maybe people aren't all that keen on independence, which is the long-term aim for Plaid Cymru, but they see from the future, they want to live in a country that's got a government that actually cares about people. So I think, that is something that's really interesting. So how do you think, practically, Maureen, how do you think that, the three devolved nations working together, what can they achieve, do you think, working together, to get better deals from Westminster?
Well, I think during COVID, we saw that the devolved nations were working closely together to try and curb the worst excesses and mistakes of Boris Johnson. So it can be done, and it'll be interesting to see what the Welsh First Minister manages to extract from Keir Starmer in the budget as a way of, showing that he, one, recognises that Labour are in severe problems in Wales, and that he actually cares about Wales. It'll be very interesting to watch that space. But we do work together through the British Irish Council. We meet devolved nations there, but I think on a party basis, it's really important that we make these links. And we can learn a lot from the progressive policies that have been introduced in Wales, and hopefully Plaid can learn from what we've managed to achieve in Scotland. I mean, I think, as you say, one of the Crown Estate is something that Plaid could well put at the forefront of its manifesto. So in relation to Fiona's point about progressive policies, I mean, I do think that there is a kind of counterbalance to Reform beginning to emerge, and it's really important that anti-Reform parties like Plaid, the SNP, really capitalise on that and show that things can be different under independence.
Fiona, do you see what's the possible? Because obviously we've got different voting systems in both countries. We're going to a new PR system now, which is completely 96 lists, 16 different constituencies, each electing 6 representatives. So it's an awful system, but it's it is what it is. Do you see in Scotland, under a slightly different system, how those of anti-Reform parties can coalesce together to ensure that they keep Reform out?
I actually don't think they'll do that at election time, and I'm sorry to say, I think Reform will get some MSPs elected, probably through the regional vote. But I can't see Scotland's political parties getting together at all. What they do is the unionist ones get together to they target seats so that don't vote don't vote for SNP there or whatever. Well, it's usually the SNP that'll be the leading party there. So the unionists have been very successful in doing that within Scotland to keep the SNP out of a seat, if you like. But I'm sorry, I can't see any of them getting together to keep out Reform, because it's almost this unknown quantity in Scotland, and sadly, I think they will get some MSPs into the Parliament.
Yeah. Maureen, obviously, you see the political situation in Scotland. It's interesting in Wales, where we had UKIP representation after the Brexit vote, and it's fascinating if you go on Wikipedia and look at their assembly members as they were then. They all basically left what party they were in, went independent, joined other parties, then went independent, then joined other parties. And obviously we got Nathan Gill, the leader of Reform in Wales, at one point. He's been sentenced this month for the Russian corruption, which again was happening, post-Brexit, because it does make you think, how much influence Russia has had on our politics in years to come. But do you see there is a potential for, because obviously in Wales, Labour have always asked Plaid Cymru supporters to lend them their votes to keep the Conservatives out. And now, the boot is on the other foot. Is that something that the SNP sees?
Well, if you go by the polls, I mean, Labour and the Tories are doing really badly in Scotland. Both their polling ratings is in the teens rather than in the 20s or 30s. So I can't see that there's going to be any, well, I don't think that there's no way that there's going to be any body working together, I think, in Scotland. But as Fiona says, it does happen locally, between the Lib Dems, for example, and the Tories, I would suggest. But, the SNP is out to win every single constituency, and, there's a possibility that we're going to win Orkney and Shetland this time. We've got brilliant candidates in those two places. So, it's really difficult to understand what's going to happen. And we've still 6 months to go, and a week's a long time in politics. So anything can change. My hope is that Reform have, peaked too soon, and that we're going to see more of these, their elected members, showing exactly what they are, which is out for themselves. I mean, when you see that Nigel Farage's appearances in Clacton have been virtually non-existent, and that, he makes £1 million from other work that he does, the more what people understand that they were responsible for Brexit, and look how what damage it's done. We've got a lot of arguments against Reform, and I think the more we get out in the doorsteps, I always say, if somebody says they're voting Reform, which is not often, I say, so can I ask you, have you already taken steps to have your own health insurance? And they'll sort of look at you, and I say, well, that they want to privatise the health system and sell it off to US companies. So you need to really take them on and not pussyfoot about.
I agree. Anyway, thank you very much, both. There's something we could talk about for many more minutes. Well, that's it for this week's Full Scottish. Before I go, I just wanted to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. We can only exist with your support. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, and please donate whatever you can afford. Thank you. And thank you again to our guests, Maureen Watt and Fiona Grahame. Thank you. And goodbye, and thank you for watching.